I was the first of 7 American children of my parents, Billy and Ann Hamill, who were immigrants from the hard, dark northern city of Belfast in the north of Ireland. And Ireland was there as part of my world from the beginning, although I knew nothing really about it. It was expressed through song, not as bad as the songs that we heard every St. Patrick's Day with the green beer and the shamrocks, the Tin Pan Alley version of being Irish. But still, it was something that was full of laughter and full of irony and joy. Because I was born in one of the worst years of the Depression, the Great Depression that marked so many people in this country, and that is still carried around by a lot of their children and grandchildren. And we learned that less, in some cases, really is more. That you could make more out of a good book from the public library than you did if you bought 17 volumes of a given writer and stared at them until they came to life. It's a time before television, before people began to think that life had to have a soundtrack, which created the headset, which made people nod and bob on the D train. But it was a time when there were so few distinctions between classes that everybody was in the same boat. That the Depression was handled on one level with merriment, on another with determination and grit. I always say that generation loved 4-letter words. For example, the word free, which for so many of them coming from countries where they were not free, were able to exult in the city of New York and in other parts of the country. The word work, 4 letters too, essential to a human life, because nobody ever wanted handouts. Nobody wanted to beg in subways. They would if it was absolutely necessary, but they didn't want to do it. And the third 4-letter word that made their lives so rich was a simple one: love. I know with my parents, I saw one quarrel in all the time that I lived with them, up until the time I went off to the Navy, where they were so angry they shouted at each other, and I'm sure berated themselves in a smothered shout the next morning. They were too busy trying to make a world and a life for their kids. And for us, the kids, we had a vague notion of Ireland, the one we heard communicated at christenings or celebrations of birthdays in certain kinds of songs. Much more likely, since they were from Belfast, that they followed the title of Seamus Heaney's later poem about the Northern style called Whatever You Say, Say Nothing. Because they came from a place, if you said the wrong sentence, you could get shot. So they were pretty careful and restrained, which doesn't mean that they were gloomy or separated from the lives of their kids. They did what they could, which meant they both worked. My mother part-time in a movie theater, and after the war as a nurse's aide in the Methodist Hospital in Brooklyn. That was what you did. If you were running a family, if you had a family, you wanted the best for them. You didn't always get the best, but you at least made the best out of what you could get. And so that's why so many of us of that generation look back with affection towards what it was like to be Irish American or Italian American or Jewish American in a certain period in the history of this country and this city when they should have been surrendering to gloom. They refused to. Between the music and the sense of irony and the refusal of the cardinal sin of all, which was self-pity, they showed us how to live. They showed us how to get through a life. They didn't harp on us about being Irish. They didn't say, don't pick your nose, the Irish don't do that. They knew there were a lot of different ways to be Irish, as there are a lot of ways to be Italian or Jewish or Polish or Mexican or Chinese. Many ways to live in this world. So all generalizations are out. But when I went to Ireland for the first time in 1963, I was there when Jack Kennedy got assassinated with my father, who was home for the first time in 31 years. But I found that even then, there were so many redeeming things about the Irish style. The sense of laughter, the sense of who do you think you are when you pretended to have qualifications for things other than what you were qualified for. Or in some cases when you expressed ambitions for something, again, where you would not stand a chance of attaining the goal. If you were 5'1", you were probably not going to make it in the National Basketball Association. But they had a sense of living in the present, to live a day at a time, to be human, one person at a time. And I think they passed that on to a lot of us who had the hyphen in our names, in our job description, Irish-American or Italian-American. They were all for getting rid of the hyphen. You didn't have to do that. So I think about it a lot more now when we have another huge immigration wave. Because I think of some of those people who are among us now, walking into my old home in Brooklyn, knocking on the door and asking if this is for rent. And see my mother there saying, come on in and we'll talk about, would you like a spotted tea? I loved that sense that they had, a welcoming sense in a city that was gradually theirs too. I think also that if they'd had a chance to come to a place like Glucksman Ireland House, to listen to the scholarship as it took apart the stereotypes, if they began to see what the real story was as compared to the mythic legend or the sentimental myth, the real story is always better than the shorthand pop version, the cartoon version. And those people that came across the ocean, that sailed right past that French immigrant in the harbor, holding the torch of welcome in front of them, those people knew what the real story was and could never find it. If they had had this to supplement what they knew, what they had learned the hard way, I think they would have been delighted. I think they would have been joyous, because there was no way to let any of us, including the children, know what the real story was. And the real story, as I said, is always better than the myth. So when I come to this place, I think of those two people that gave me life, and gave me more than a seat at a table, but gave me food, gave me books, gave me a belief in the future that said, you know, things might not change tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow we're going to do pretty good. Those people were giants. We rode in on their shoulders, and we owe it to them to be kind to the people who are undergoing the same thing right now, to be welcoming, to say, your kid could be president. You could live to see that happen. It can happen. And this is the kind of place that will supply the intellectual material that's needed, the sense of community that's needed, the sense of true pride, not vanity, but pride that is always needed to have a vision of the future. So when I come here, it's not simply to find out about the past, but the past as it illuminates the way to the future. And I hope my grandson comes here when it's time, and any of the other tribe that bears an honorable name. Thank you for listening.